So my name is Jonathan Stray. I came to journalism via computer science, and after writing graphic software at Adobe for many years, I ended up as an editor at the Associated Press in New York. And at that time, I was assigned to the WikiLeaks material. This is the fall of 2010. And we were searching through the State Department cables, which is 251,000 documents. And we did it by text search, as everyone who worked on this material did. We thought of things that might be in the documents, and then we searched for them. And the thing that worried me was that something would be in these documents that we would never think to search for. And so I began to try out techniques from natural language processing and data visualization to solve this problem. So this is the problem I've spent the last 3 years of my life on. This is a surprisingly common problem. We know from our work that when journalists get a big document dump, the average size is 9,000 pages. And let me show you what thousands of pages looks like, just so you can get an idea. This is another story that I worked on. And this is that. It's two up. This is only about 5,000 pages, so this is a smallish document dump. This was from a Freedom of Information request to the U.S. Department of State concerning the behavior of private security contractors in Iraq. Does the name Blackwater mean anything to anyone in this room? Right, so you remember they were infamous for shooting a bunch of civilians in a couple different incidents. Well, this is every time anyone fired a weapon, there was an investigation, and to their great credit, the State Department gave us all of these documents. We believe this to be substantially complete, involving every case except for the 5 that are under current criminal prosecution. And so it sort of goes on like this, and there's some photographs, and you know, there's pages with text, but even when there's pages with text, it's in terrible condition. It's not a regular format. There's no way that a sort of standard search engine, or you can't really put this into a database. It's just a mess. Does anybody know how big 5,000 pages is? I mean, physically. Like, how tall is it if you stack it on your desk? Anyone want to guess? Yeah, okay, sure. Depends on the paper. A room full of journalists, wonderful. Yeah, so it's it's about this tall, right? So when you put into your printer, your copy machine, your 500 pages, it's like this. So by 10, it's there, and that's a sort of medium size. 10,000 is like that. Does anyone know how long it takes to read 10,000 pages? If you could do, say, 1 page a minute. 10,000 days. No, not 10,000 days. No. If you can do 1 page a minute, it will take you about 3 weeks of full-time work, right? And that's not following up on reporting. That's not taking notes. That's flipping through at 1 page a minute. So, and that's relatively modest, right? The cables material is 25 times that. So clearly, we had to do something. So this is the sort of data visualization that gets everybody's attention and gets you research funding and that sort of thing. What we're looking at here is this is again the WikiLeaks material, but this is not the cables. This is the Iraq war logs, and this is 1 month, so it's actually only 11,000 documents, and each dot is one document, and the computer has labeled the dots by the keywords that it's extracted from each document. So here, fell, killing, civ, which is civilian. And then the colors were assigned by the military. So we didn't have to assign the colors; they already existed. And what the computer has done is it's put edges between documents that have similar text, and it computes similarity by looking at distributions of words. Essentially, if 2 documents have a lot of words in common, then the computer considers them similar. And what jumps out at you immediately is all of this blue stuff in the middle. And if you look at the legend here, that's criminal event. So those are events where the military wasn't involved at all. That's civilians doing things to other civilians. And you can see actually it's rather violent. We have clusters around the word handcuffed, around shot and blindfolded and corpse. This is the Iraq Civil War. And it jumps out immediately as much bigger than all of this green stuff, which is enemy action. That's when the military was involved. So now, this is not a shock. If you have been, know anything about the Iraq War, you know that most of the violence was actually the civil war as opposed to military action. But it was reassuring that it popped out immediately. But we also found other things, like this, truck tanker. The red color means these were categorized as explosive hazards. This is people blowing up or threatening to blow up tanker trucks full of fuel. And so there's a couple dozen of these. We went through the AP archives and we found we had reported about half of these. So maybe we wouldn't have thought to look for that. Here's something on convoy, and then line. There's something called a 9-line medevac report. It gives the location and the number of injuries and stuff. This is actually all the medical evacuations. And we found all of this other stuff. Somewhere in here is pipelines, so we found some stuff relating to the oil infrastructure and so on. So interesting, but this was 3 weeks of messing around with a bunch of Python scripts and such. Not really a replicable process, not really something that we could ask other reporters to use. So with the help of a grant from the Knight Foundation, who are also one of the sponsors of this conference, I've spent the last few years of my life working on a piece of software, not that one, called Overview. Overview is an easy-to-use, large document set analysis tool. And it does all of the obvious things. You can search through documents and such. But really, the interesting part is this tree that it builds. So here is a subset of about 7,000 documents. This is the State Department cables, where all of this started for me. And this was at the request of the AP's Caracas bureau chief in Venezuela. And he said, well, give me every cable with the word Caracas in it, and let's see what we can find. What Overview does is it automatically sorts the documents into folders and subfolders. At the top here is every document, so all 6,000 odd of them. And then it's broken them down into this folder, which has words like FARC and Chavez and opposition. This stuff, which seems to be ambassadors in Ecuador and the Security Council. And then this stuff, which I'll look at a little more closely. Oil, USD, percent, billion, companies. This is stuff seems to be oil and finance. And indeed, if you look a little closer, the subfolders of that are all of this stuff with words like billion and rate and inflation and banks. So that's the banking stuff. And this is PDVSA, which is a state oil company. That's the oil industry. So I can open up that folder and I can start reading the documents in that folder. If I want to get more specific, I can go down into subfolders, and it starts telling me that as I go down, things get more and more specific until eventually I reach a folder where all of the documents have some set of words. So in this case, they all have the word Venezuela, which is not a shock, but occasionally you find, look at that, there's oil and Cuba down in the bottom there. When I find things, I can start tagging them. So I can say, that is the oil folder, and so on. Or I can search for things, like say I want to know where all of the material on the elections are. And it will show me where it's filed things with that word. So it kind of gives me a cross-section of the documents. This has been used on a number of stories. For example, I actually did a story on those documents that I showed you from the State Department. And rather than writing about particular incidents that contractors were involved in, I was able to write a story with this headline: what did private security contractors do in Iraq? In general, right? And this is the one sentence that, it's a deceptively simple sentence that actually would take you, in principle, reading through the entire stack of documents to get. The documents show that mostly contractors fired at approaching civilian vehicles to protect U.S. motorcades from the threat of suicide bombers. Most of the reports read like, a vehicle got too close, we shot at the engine, the vehicle stopped, we sped on. And so on. And we were able to get interesting statistical information, such as out of the 600-odd incidents that we had, we found 14 where people were injured or killed, and we knew how many motorcades there were, and we worked out that about 2% involved shots fired. Now, I don't know if that's a lot or a little, but the point is this allows us to get a picture that would be otherwise unavailable by going through this entire document set instead of focusing on the particularly notorious incidents. Now, this panel has the unglamorous title of Reducing the Cost of Investigations. It sounds very unsexy, but consider the amount of time that this might save. And in fact, here's another story involving, in North Carolina, they had a new system for benefits, and in the US they have this food stamp system to help people who can't afford food, right? They were months behind. 70,000 families were going hungry. And the reporter filed a Freedom of Information request, again, 5,000 pages. He spent the morning scanning the material in. He spent the afternoon looking through it in overview. He found this one folder which had this mailing list where all of the county officials were talking to each other. Out of 5,000 documents, he found 147 that were interesting. By the end of the day, he had the bones of the story, which was that the system wasn't working at all, and actually eventually it was determined to be a browser compatibility bug. It didn't work in Internet Explorer. That took 2 months for the government to admit. He said it would have taken him a month to do this story the old-fashioned way. I think that is an improvement, and I think we're on the threshold of seeing a great many tools and techniques that can dramatically lower the time and cost of investigations. I hope that means more and better investigations. All right, that's my show. It is, once again, overviewproject.org. It is supported by the Associated Press and the Knight Foundation. It's free, so you should go there and use this system if you have large stacks of documents. Thank you.
So I'm going to pick up on what Jonathan said about the kind of cost and time of documents in this case. And I'm going to talk about, well, let's get this question out of the way first. So, which one is a journalist? Any particular suggestions? Who cares? The point I want to make is that you kind of have a number of mysteries around journalism, particularly investigative journalism. It's a bit like a magic circle, and I think we need to dispel some of those myths. I think it's actually more like Lego than magic, and that's really the theme of what I want to talk about. It's why investigations are not magic, and how to reduce the costs involved in that, and why things like overview and various other techniques I'm going to mention. They're really demystifying a lot of the processes, which is really about legwork and about reducing that legwork. So I think the key question, if you're looking to do any sort of investigation, is where your costs lie. And they generally lie in these four areas. So it's the people involved, the time involved, the equipment and the travel. And I'm particularly going to talk about the first two. So I think the first thing is, as with Lego, breaking things down into pieces makes it a lot easier to reduce the costs. It makes it a lot easier to allocate those pieces to other people. So this was an investigation that I was involved in on Help Me Investigate, which is a project which was funded by Channel 4's 4IP fund. And this was about collaborative journalism. So this cost absolutely zero. This was a number of people helping each other out to submit FOI requests, analyse the results, leak documents, and so on. We did the same thing with the London Weekly, so we had photographers taking pictures. We had people on the streets checking out the distribution claims. We had some advanced search experts. We had people, as a great use of Google Street View to identify that the registered address of the London Weekly was a PO box on a street in London, even though they were supposed to have about £50 million of investment. So it was really about breaking down the investigation into different pieces. So, right, we need to see how many sellers there are. We need to get copies of this. We need to check these names. And then volunteers basically taking part in that and taking on the task that they found easiest. This was a more recent one, was the Olympic torch relay. This involved people not just in the UK but in Iceland, in Germany, in Italy, looking at names, looking at company records, looking at all sorts of other details, getting pictures, to try and essentially answer the question of, did the Olympic organisers meet the promises that they had made about the Olympic torch relay? I've written a series of posts about that if you do want more in the background of that, but I don't want to spend too much time on that here. And one of the things I found in terms of breaking down those investigations, breaking down a particular story, is thinking about, there are particular skills, I think, there are 5 particular skills. One is the data, so someone who can work with data is always really useful. A community manager, so there's a community of people that have case studies, stories to tell, documents to leak, things like that, so someone who has those relationships. A multimedia journalist, so someone who can bring the story to life. You might have data, but how do you actually engage people with the stories around that? So that might be video or audio or maps or interactives. And a curator, someone who's looking at the background to the story. What's the history, what's the policy changes, and so on. And then the final role is an editor to kind of organise those elements and pull them all together. But this is increasingly how I'm organising things and allocating parts of an investigation. And this is being done all over. Paul Lewis is a great example of this at The Guardian. His investigation into the death of Ian Tomlinson at the G20 protest was very reliant on connecting with people online. Likewise, the death of someone being deported on a flight by G4S. And undercover policing. A lot of that was due to participating in online communities around the environmental movement. So I think a lot of this is not necessarily about cloak and dagger. It's just about engaging with the community. And there's tons of this stuff out there. There are people doing investigations all over the place. Some really fascinating stuff that goes under the radar in football, for example. Some of the football blogs are doing more investigative stuff than national football reporters or sports reporters. Welfare, tremendous amounts of investigation going on in welfare. And you just need to find these communities. They often have a lot of information and a lot of experiences, but they're not terribly good at telling the stories or certainly telling it in a balanced way. So I guess that's the first point, is make yourself useful to those communities. I don't mean storm in there and kind of say, give me all your information. I'm a wonderful journalist. Look at the size of my ego. But, they're doing some fantastic stuff, and quite often you can find a role in those. That might be, for example, sharing some data that you found, or it might be helping people to identify individuals, giving kind of tutorials, backgrounders, which is what we did with the torch relay. Some tools to be aware of. I think always come back to this principle. If you have to do something more than once, get a computer to do it. That's what Overview does. This is one recent example. We did something with the Daily Mirror on housing benefit recipients, so private landlords that got housing benefit. This is one of the spreadsheets that we used to look at that data. We had names of landlords, we had the local authority, and we had the amount. Well, you have to search for each of those companies. You have to find the directors, and then you have to search on the directors. So what I put in the spreadsheet was just quite a simple formula that just took the name of the landlord and generated a search URL on Judo, which is basically like Company's House, gives you company information. And then likewise, once you typed in the director name, it would generate a search URL for that. So you just had to click on the URL. You didn't have to type in the name each time or the landlord. We even, because the structure of the pages containing the company pages is consistent, wrote a scraper in Google Spreadsheets. This is just a one-line formula which grabbed the address of the landlord and other details. So again, you don't have to copy and paste those. Scraper Wiki is a tremendous, and scraping generally is a tremendous tool for automating repetition, for stopping you having to do things more than once. Certainly if you want to get tweets or Twitter followers, you can do that pretty instantly. For more, you'll have to learn coding. I wrote a book about that. There you go. That's my plug done. These are just a couple of stories that were done with a scraper in Scotland. And this was just publicly available data on audits of councils in Scotland. There's a tool called Freedive, Night Freedive, if you want to publish your data in a searchable database, which we used on the Guardian data blog on council spending. So we did FOI requests to a couple of hundred councils, and then we put it all in a spreadsheet and opened it up. And then people found leads, and they were able to chase them locally. Because often you'll have more stories, more leads than you can deal with on your own. More simply, if you want some more simple tools, IFTTT is a great introduction to this. It stands for if this, then that. And you basically set up a trigger, like if there's a new news article or if there's a new email in my inbox which meets these characteristics, then it will do something else. And changedetection.com will tell you when a web page has changed, so you don't have to constantly check it if you're looking at disclosure logs or anything like that. And then finally, I think it's important to help sources find you. Historically we've had to go out and find all our sources, but you have to remember now that people are searching for the same information as you, asking the same questions as you. So when we did the torch relay, I made sure all the posts were tagged with every single name of anyone mentioned, and that led one of the torchbearers to actually find us, because he was Googling his own name. And this was kind of intended. And then he got in touch with us, and he became one of the case studies in the story. We did lots and lots of very simple stories to try and boost the search engine ranking against particular terms that we hoped people would be searching for. So we got comments like this, which led to this, and Paul Myers will probably talk a little bit about this later. So this guy is the MD of Adidas. He never appeared on the list of Olympic torchbearers. He was never named. Although his two daughters were. But we had to kind of stand up the fact that they were. And that's one of his daughter's Facebook pages. About 6 months later, she put up a picture of her and her sister and her dad. Persistence is really important for this. You don't build a search engine, a search ranking overnight. You have to keep on doing the same thing and talk about the same things. So, just to sum up, those are the kind of main costs. Making yourself useful saves you time, saves you cost on people. It helps you get other people involved. Automating things saves you time. As Jonathan said, it can save you weeks. It can allow you to do things that you just wouldn't have the time to do otherwise. And likewise, making yourself findable saves you time and people, because people approach you and it takes you less time to find them. In terms of the equipment and travel, I think Lyra's going to talk a little bit more about that, but I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Lyra McKee. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's really lovely to be here. Just before I start, can I ask you to please be gentle with me, because I made the mistake of flying with Ryanair this morning and I'm now deaf in one ear after a really bumpy flight. So, as Paul said, my name is Lyra McKee. I'm a freelance journalist from Belfast in Northern Ireland. And what I wanted to talk to you about today was funding long-term investigations. As you can see from the title there, it's how to fund investigative journalism in a world of clickbait and listicles. No offence to Business Insider, but, I think there's still... I think this is something that's on a lot of people's minds. So, just to give you a bit of background about me, I started in journalism nearly 10 years ago, and within a couple of years, I entered journalism in 2005, which was the year that the industry was the best. It was the best year for newspaper advertising ever, and then there was the crash. And by the time I was at university, everything was up in flames. So I never forget the first time I wanted to be an investigative reporter. It was the one thing I loved doing more than anything else in the world. And I never forget going to my university careers fair and asking the representative from the major leading newspaper in Northern Ireland, did they hire investigative journalists? And she laughed at me and said, no, they didn't hire those people anymore, and that was an excess of the past. So the last 5 years for me have really been about a stubborn refusal to accept that, because I love investigative journalism and I just wanted to find a way to do it and to make a living out of doing what I love. If any of you have ever found the one thing you love, you know that you don't need to be a millionaire because you're rich for that, to be able to do the one thing you love every day and get up and be able to pay your bills and just, you never work a day in your life. So as I said, the last 5 years I've been trying to figure out, well, how do we fund investigations? All the costs that come with them, the time cost, all those things. How do you do it? And for me, the crunch point came with this story. So this man here, this is a mural of a man called Robert Bradford. He was the Member of Parliament for South Belfast, and he was murdered in November 1981. And nearly 2 years ago, I was sitting in a classroom with a friend of mine, and he mentioned Robert, and he'd known Robert, and he told me about, before Robert died, Robert was a really outspoken politician, and he criticised the IRA quite a lot, but before he died, he was said to have been working on something sensitive, and there'd always been this rumour about the murder, that he'd been asking questions about something and no one knew what it was, and that just intrigued me right away. Yourself, you hear a story and your spidey senses start tingling, and suddenly you just want to go after that. And so I started looking into it, and the thing about Robert Bradford was he was someone who was always asking tough questions anyways, so it wouldn't matter if he passed away when he was 70 of natural causes, he probably would have been working on something. I actually think he would have been a better investigative reporter if, they'd chosen to go down that path instead. So I've been working on a story for the last 2 years, and I hit a problem. For the first time, I've run a blog called The Muckraker, which, I blog about the small-time corruption and government. But with this story, I had to go abroad to find people who had fled Northern Ireland during the Troubles. I also needed to fund trips to the National Archives in London. And I had no idea where this money was going to come from, right? I'm 23 years old. I don't have any money. I don't have any newspapers backing me. The newspapers think I'm a brat back home because I insist on doing these stories, and one of them said recently that I hadn't paid my dues, and my response to that was I spent 5 years paying my dues, doing work experience placements, which I didn't get any pay for. That was the part where I paid my dues. So that was what journalism looked like when I was starting out. So I had to find another way. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about today, was finding the other way. And it took me 5 years to find it. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a site called Beacon Reader. A couple of you, yeah. So Beacon Reader is kind of like Kickstarter for journalists. Oh, and it allows you to do two things. Allows you to back your favourite reporter for $5 a month. Or it allows you, journalists, to run a crowdfunding campaign. So, for example, if you want to run a crowdfunding campaign to investigate a specific topic, and you have your, say, set target, mostly it's either set by number of backers or set by number of cash. But that's how you get, you can raise funds that way. And it was a really smart idea. The guy who started it is actually, or the co-founder is the former managing editor of Facebook. And so for me, I thought, I've tried so many different things. I went in for competitions, I applied for grants. The problem is everyone was chasing those things. So I thought, right, I'll give this a shot 3 weeks ago. Now, for me, I jokingly called this Plan B, the crowdfunder. It was actually more like Plan Z, because I tried so many other things to try and raise the funds to complete this story, and nothing was working. And last night at 20 to 11, we finally hit the goal. Set out to get 200 backers. As you can see, managed to raise nearly $6,000 in 3 weeks. As of last night, that number was 1,330 there. You can see that's in recurring monthly subscriptions. People who signed up to back me for $5, $10, $15 a month. And in exchange, it's actually gone up to 1,400 as of this morning. So basically what the money was going to be used for was, as I said, to fund my research, to let me go to the National Archives. They allowed me to cut down all the other jobs I had to work, freelance assignments, to pay the bills, so I could just focus on doing this story. And, for me, I just wanted to share a couple of tips with people, because for me this is the first thing I've tried that's actually worked. Everything else went down like a lead balloon. The grants, the funding applications, nothing worked until this happened. And I was really at the point where I was like, if this doesn't work, I don't know what else I'm going to do next. I don't know how to take the story forward without the funds, because it was the first story I really hit, where before I could always find a way of getting around the money problem. With this one I really couldn't. So the first thing I would say is, if you're thinking of doing a crowdfunder to fund your work, and I would recommend considering it as an option, is, like, a friend of mine was asking me about this recently, and he said to me, he was talking about setting up a magazine back in Ireland, and he said, I'm thinking of doing a crowdfunder for it, and he said, do you think there's a market for it? And I said, I don't think there's a market for it, I think there's a network. If you're an individual reporter, if you're someone like me who works at home from their bedroom or from the coffee shops, wherever you can find, you don't have a market, but you have people who like your work, who like you and want to help. And it's a very different approach to how, say, a newspaper would approach it, because they think in terms of markets where they don't know who their readers are. I know who most of my readers are. I interact with them on Twitter. They talk to me through the blog. They talk to me through Twitter and Facebook. I meet with them for coffee. And a lot of reporters who work in newspapers locally kind of are like, really? You do all that stuff? They're kind of creeped out by it. But I think that's totally normal, because I don't think of my readers as, these people who should be so grateful to read my work. I'm really grateful they read my work. I just think of them as collaborators. And the amazing thing happened was that by taking this approach, throughout the 2 years I've been researching, it's like I have this network of mini reporters. So I'll get these phone calls from people saying, listen, I've met this person who knows this, and you really need to talk to him. And that's been really helpful for me, especially in Northern Ireland. One of the big problems I've had, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Northern Irish politics, but we've had the religious divide for many years. And Robert Bradford was a unionist politician, and I'm a Catholic. So I'm approaching, people who are died in the wool, unionists who are in their 60s, 70s, who maybe be a wee bit wary of me. But because I already had this network, I had people who knew them, who went to them and said, talk to her, she's all right. And so the religious barrier wasn't an issue. If you're wondering how they knew my religion, my name is Gaelic, so that's how nitpicky Northern Ireland is. If you know what street someone lives on, you know what their religion is. If you know what their name is, you got a fair idea of what their religion is. So that was the first thing I'd say, is if you want to do this, build a network. Don't go for a market. Talk to people, engage with the people who are reading your work, bring them into the fold. The one thing we've done with the crowdfunder is that it's kind of like serialized investigative journalism. I'm publishing a short chapter from the book every month, and the people who backed me are getting to see the book 2 years before it's going to be published. So most people think that's absolutely insane idea, and you know what, maybe it is, but I've always been like that. I've always taken that approach with my investigations, and I just think it breeds. I hate the Wizard of Oz approach where you go away for 6 months and then you come back and say, "Look what I found." I'd rather my readers come with me as I'm knocking the doors. Going from doorstep to doorstep and banging doors. Even if they're just reading it on the blog and they know that I'm doing that, it changes the relationship. And it encourages people to help you, and it makes them want to help you, because they're a part of the journey, and they're invested in your journey, and they're invested in you finding the story. If I don't break the story, my readers will be as heartbroken as I will, and we'll all probably cry together and get together in the pub and have a weep about it or something. But which is unthinkable for probably the average journalist in a big newsroom who doesn't really meet their readers on a day-to-day basis. But as I said, I have like a really small but loyal fan base. As I said, 200 backers. A lot of people who I didn't know actually backed it. But I thought it was amazing that 200 backers generated nearly $6,000 in 3 weeks. Like, I really thought it was going to be about $1,000. In fact, I didn't think I was going to get it at all. So the other piece of advice I would give is, if you're doing a crowdfunder, have someone who pulls you back from the abyss. And what I mean by that is, you will find a point in the middle of the campaign where no one's backing you, because everyone waits till the last week. That's when they jump in. And you sit there and you think, oh my God, I've got egg on my face, this isn't going to work. Like, at the start of the week, I still had 112 backers to go, and I was sitting plotting, what am I going to do next? It's all up in the air. This was a stupid idea. And it was one of the founders of Beacon who emailed me, had a Skype call with me and said, listen, it's totally normal. Just keep going. Give it one more try. And the thing is, if you're a journalist right now, and especially for a young journalist starting out, you know what it's like. You send your CVs off. There's that feeling of despair sometimes. You wonder if you're ever going to get to do the one thing you really love. Have the one person who tells you, give it one more try. For me, that person has been Paul. It's been other friends of mine. But you need just that one person who, when you want to give up, they tell you, no, don't, give it one more push. Because sometimes it's just that one more push that you need. Last piece of advice is, don't give up. As I said, I've been doing this stuff for nearly 10 years. I trundled from work placement to work placement, always hoping that I was going to get a job at the end of it, and the job never came. It was pretty miserable. There were times I was really, really broke. Luckily the last couple of years haven't been too bad. But, it's a really tough time to be a young journalist right now. And the one thing I'll say is, if you love this, stick at it. Because there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you need to hold on. And the best bit of advice I ever received was, the brick walls aren't there to keep you out. They're there to see how badly you want it. And I know that's not easy, especially if you don't come from a family with money. I don't come from a family with money at all, so I can totally sympathise. I mean, journalism in many ways has become a middle-class profession, Only the kids who can afford to take 6 months work full-time are getting in at the moment. But as I said, find a way. Just keep going. You will figure it out eventually. I have to say, I really didn't think I'd ever figure it out. For me, I said most of the money is going towards funding things like research trips and trips abroad. Some of the money is going towards just to help me focus on the story, as I said. And you know what? This is the first time I've had a steady reporting gig in my life. And the whole time I've been doing this, I've never had a steady paying reporting gig. So it took me nearly 10 years to get there, but as of last night, I got there in the end. So as I said, keep on trucking. All right? Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Keith Cooper. I'm a freelance journalist. I do a little bit of investigative stuff, mainly on social welfare stuff, actually. But it's just sort of a question for Jonathan, but also perhaps more broadly, sort of a concern that I have sometimes when there seems to be this growing focus on data journalism and processing large volumes of data. Whether there's a sort of a divide between what the explanation this data gives you, what facts it appears to show, and what the explanation, what the kind of deeper explanation that journalists should be looking for behind that data. And I just wanted to ask you about the one you said, I think it was processing 5,000 documents, to come up with this line that most contractors, I might not have got this completely right, but most contractors who had killed civilians did so because they feared they were driving explosive materials. Is that correct? I mean, roughly.
No, that's not actually what I said. I said mostly what they did was shoot at cars that got too close. I can't speak as to why they killed the civilians they did. I'm not inside their heads.
No, exactly. No, I mean, I guess my question was, is there a danger that sort of presenting that information, it kind of gives it kind of says this is possibly what happened, this is what the reports were, but the kind of real investigation or the real sort of journalism, I'm not saying you didn't do this because obviously it's quite a superficial reading of it, is to kind of find out whether that's true, whether that they just reported that, because that seems to me like a sort of thing you might say if you killed a civilian and you found out later. I mean, so that was the sort of my question.
So, to your broader point, I certainly don't propose that journalists rely exclusively on data, and that is only because I don't propose that journalists rely exclusively on one source. And actually, for the Iraq security contractor story, Well, first of all, I was at the Associated Press, so I talked to the staff who worked in Iraq. But we also contacted the State Department. So if you read the story, there's actually a number of different sources that we triangulate from. And that's very common. There was another story that one of the overview users just did on police misconduct in Long Island, where they did an analysis of legislation to show that the state government had never tried to change this secrecy law that was hiding a bunch of terrible things. A drunk police officer shot a cab driver, for example, and the investigation was covered up. And he used Overview to search through the documents and show that they had never tried to fix this. But he also did a survey of every legislator. He actually sent a survey form and said, has there ever been an attempt to change this? So, as in any other type of journalism, the key is to triangulate from different sources. And just because you have 5,000 documents doesn't mean you have 5,000 true documents. Is that helpful at all? All right.
Should we have Jack?
Okay, cool. So I'm Jack Searle. I'm from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. It's a non-profit journalism organisation here in London. Question for Lyra and Paul. In terms of the sort of network and community and creating and engaging with a network and a community, do you think it's better to be known as a good investigator, as a good journalist, as an honest broker in general, or specifically on one investigation? That's your field, that's your area, and that's where you engage with the network. And Lyra, when you're crowdfunding, do you need like a big flag waver? I mean, you said you need somebody to pull you back from the abyss, but do you need an individual who's got a big social media following, or just somebody who's generally quite a kind of a bigwig to wave the flag for you to start the ball rolling?
It's Lyra, by the way. I've only discovered that myself this morning. So,
You're all right, don't worry.
I mistakenly said Lyra earlier, so it's
I've
partly my
been
fault.
dealing with this for 23 years, honestly. You're all right.
I would say it's better to be known within a particular sector, so to be known for a specialist area than a general kind of idea of a reputation. It's easy to overestimate. Essentially, I think if you've got a reputation as an investigative journalist, then that's a reputation within the media, within journalism, and it's unlikely that unless you're kind of Donald McIntyre or someone who's a broadcast, kind of very visual investigative journalist, then it's unlikely that most people will know you actually outside of that. So it's better to be, like Shiv Malik has done a great job of again, kind of getting the same sort of information around welfare for The Guardian. So I think it's that. I think if people can trust that this isn't just a story to you, it's something that you've invested a lot of time and years, ideally, of your life in, then they're going to be more comfortable and confident about working with you or helping you out, because they're kind of going to know that there's going to come a time in the future when they might ask you for some help in some way.
I think I agree with Paul. At the same time, it hasn't quite worked out like that for me. Some of the stories I've worked on have been, very different. Like the last big story before I started working on the book 2 years ago was about a government department in Northern Ireland and their strategy for bringing big companies to invest and how badly it was going. Yet I found that a lot of people who discovered me through that story backed me on this one. And they backed me because it was more, some of it was more emotional, or they only checked out the story they wouldn't have been interested in otherwise because I was working on it. The one thing I would say is I think there's always this argument that, people won't pay for journalism. But paying for journalism is an act of love. And if they really like you, they will. That's what it comes down to. They have to like you. They have to have a personal relationship with you. And if they care about what you're doing and you talk to them and, you have a relation, like I said, you're collaborators, then they'll do it. They don't have to do it, but they will. So, yeah, I think it works both ways. It's good to have a specialism. also, you know, if you have that personal relationship with people, it travels from story to story with you. To answer your question about do you need someone with a big social media following, that wasn't my experience. It actually came down to, again, the personal network. People, I'm always shocked, and every time I've come up with it, this was the sort of second or third time I've had to ask the crowd for help. The first one was last year, and I asked for help with, it was a contest for funding, but it went by votes. And the things that people will do, the lengths people will go to when they care about your work to help you out is incredible. And I have to give credit to them for that. They're totally invested in you as a part in what you're doing. You know, I found the help. Like, there was a couple of bigwigs who tweeted for me, which was really nice of them. But the biggest help boost came from the personal recommendations. It was people who were going and emailing their friends saying, you need to back her, we need to get this over the line. And then that created a chain reaction. You know, and it was really weird. The kindness of strangers will always really shock you. I mean, the things that people have done for me, people I didn't know, who I'd never heard of before, I did the crowdfunder 3 weeks ago, who were coming on and they were getting their wives, their aunts, their uncles to back. There was whole families. You know, I kept seeing the same names, surname coming up again and again. So, yeah, I don't think you need to have a big wig at all. I think you just need to have the personal connection. It was like Homicide Watch. Do you remember the crowdfunder for Homicide Watch on Kickstarter? Does anyone remember that? So Homicide Watch DC, obviously I'm from Belfast, so I was never going to, it's not something that I would have read, because I wouldn't have needed to read it. But I backed them because I wanted them to do so well, because I'd never met Chris and Laura, but I loved them and I loved their story, that they started at the kitchen table and that they were trying to help these poor people who had, the people that they were serving couldn't afford to back their Kickstarter because they were, you know, ethnic minorities who have been their communities have been ravaged by crime in Washington. And, you know, so the rest of us chipped in, and it was almost like spreading the love. Okay, well, they can't help, but we want you to keep doing this for them, so we'll give you some money. Again, as I said, the kindness of strangers will really shock you. You know, my faith in humanity is always sort of restored when these things happen. You know, which when you're from Northern Ireland is a big thing.
Right. My name is Chester Young from CY Film Production. I'm a filmmaker, stroke journalist. One thing I just wanted to ask about, you know, because it's really important what we're doing in terms of, you know, saving us time as investigative filmmakers or journalists, and you know, using data that's been presented by government and to analyze it and get, you know, story out of it. My question here is this data being used to get information, and is it also preventing us from doing the real journalism, which is going in the field, asking questions, and trying to find out the story rather than just depending on some documents and going through them and sitting in the office and trying to crack up a story from those documents? So is there a balance between you getting this document, this information from the data, and going in the field and trying to find out the reality and asking people who would be involved in these issues? And also, question for Lyra, and the crowdfunding thing, well done, and I really admire your passion. But the thing is, I've had experience with crowdfunding, and my downfall is the fact that I try to do political films that hit the heart of the establishment. And when the mainstream media, example is, I was trying to do a documentary about the student uprising. I was trying to do a documentary about the student uprising in 2010. And I went online, you know, with the Indiegogo trying to do crowdfunding. But what I realized is that people can only fund you if they feel comfortable, because there are a lot of people who read the media, who see stories in the media about the students and about the riots and all that, and they don't really want to support you because they say those students don't represent us, you know, because they're violent, they do this and they get arrested, and the media is really on a manhunt to arrest some of the students. And also, it's also depend on your contacts, really, the amount of people you have and who can support you. And even some of my family were not there to support me because they just think it's not relevant, you know.
Sure. So is there a balance between work with documents or data and work in the field? Of course. Data is a source, and I think I would object to your characterization of data work as not real journalism. Of course it's real journalism. But of course it's not all of journalism as well.
So to answer your question, firstly, 2010, totally different time for journalism and crowdfunding. I think we'd get a different reaction if we did it now. Secondly, in terms of not having the contacts, I didn't have the contacts either, but I worked my ass off and got them, and that's what you need to do. Secondly, I think you need to, in terms of the media, like, you know, challenging what the mainstream media are saying, well, it's the same with my story, you know what I mean? There's conflicting narratives, I get attacked a lot, people, a couple of big name journalists have went after me, you know, to criticise me, and you just got to get on with it. And if you're credible and you're saying I can present you with an alternative view, I can present evidence to back up what I'm saying, and if you have a continual conversation with your network, then they'll back you. It all starts with building that network.
I'll just add as well that we did a crowdsourcing thing both on Help Investigate and on The Guardian, and actually it was harder on The Guardian because people kind of were writing quite angry comments saying, why should we help you? This is your job, you're paid to do this. And rightly so, this is just a viable objection, whereas on Help Investigate people could see this isn't a commercial news organisation and so on. So in some ways, if you've not got that formal backing, if you can say this is a story that isn't being told or a voice that isn't being heard, then I think you've got a stronger case. And in your case, it may be, well, yeah, there might be a large proportion of people who don't like that group of people, but if that group of people doesn't think they're being heard, then are they willing to fund the particular project? It's who your network is, if you like, who's going to support it.